This conference
Gotcha,
will
Brenda.
now be recorded.
Yeah, we're set.
Good morning, good morning. I will bring this meeting to order. It's October 20th, 2023 at 9:03 a.m. Do we have any public comments? Hearing none, let's tackle the consent agenda. There are 4 items on the consent agenda. Meeting minutes. Brian, did you want to go into?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let me go through them. We've got the meeting minutes from the regular meeting of July 21st, the special meeting of August 3rd, a report out with a resolution to approve the single transaction for the under 500,000 and no more in aggregate than $1 million. The progress to targets, red line memos for FY23, our prior fiscal year. You might recall in July, we provided a draft look back. We used those memos to do merit reviews over the summer. And then as we work to complete our audit, we then refine and redline those documents and have them finalized at today's meeting. A few red lines, immaterial overall, still progress. It was a good year. And then the 4th item are the regular meeting schedules for the board, the Audit Compliance and Governance Committee, Budget Operations and Compensation Committee, Deployment Committee, and Joint Committee. And Cheryl reached out to the chairs of each of those committees to confirm their availability for those dates. So those would be the regular meeting schedules for next year. So those are the 4 resolutions on the consent agenda.
Does anybody have any questions? Okay, do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Bettina.
Motion.
This is Bettina, second.
Great, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Good.
Joe, there we go. Perfect. Thank you. We can go to the next slide. There were a few materials that we provided as report outs. So folks are interested, feel free to read through those. If you have any questions, just reach out. We're going to do progress to target updates. But with that, we can go to the agenda item 4A. Yeah, this is the audit.
Also, Tom Flynn.
Yeah, Tom and Dan. I don't know if Tom, are you there? Let's see him. That's okay. Dan Smith, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Fantastic. Great. Yep, it's all yours.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Smith. I'm the Associate Director of Financial Reporting. I'm filling in for Jane Murphy this morning to discuss our audit and ACFR for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2023. Our agenda includes a discussion of the reports issued, which is the ACFR, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, the audit opinion and auditor level of responsibility and financial overview, and the required communications. Additionally, if anyone has any questions that they'd like to reach out to the auditors at PKF O'Connor Davies directly with, we'll provide the contact information on an upcoming slide. And I'd be happy to answer any questions today or after if anybody wants to discuss further. Next slide. So for our ACFR this year, we received an unmodified opinion on the financial statements, which is the goal of an audit. It's also known as a clean opinion. In addition to the ACFR in the package, the auditor has limited responsibility related to the required supplementary information, which are some tables from that relate to our pension and OPEB programs. And then the auditors do not have audit responsibility over the introductory section or the statistical section included in the financial report. Next slide. For some financial highlights on the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position, which this is just the government accounting term for income statement. Our operating revenues increased 3.2 million year over year. The main drivers of this are a 3.8 million increase in rec sales due to this being the first year of tranche 6 Shrek revenues being included, as well as some non-Shrek recs from the 32 megawatt RCIP extension. Additionally, there's a $1.1 million increase in other income or other revenues due to ESS program reimbursements. Our energy storage, we began receiving reimbursements this fiscal year for the first time, as well as higher loan fees and the beginning of some EV carbon offset revenues in fiscal year 23. Additionally, we see a $0.9 million increase in energy system sales of PPA projects to IPC, and this is just volume based. We sold a couple more projects than we did in the prior year. And offsetting these is a $2.4 million decrease in Regi auction proceeds. And this was due to our December 2022 auction hitting a statutory calendar year ratepayer relief threshold, which lowered our proceeds from that auction by about $2 million that went back to the ratepayers. Next slide. Operating expenses as a whole decreased $3.6 million year over year. The biggest decrease is an $8.3 million decrease in grants and incentive programs. This is due to RCIP incentive payments decreasing significantly, as well as slightly lower ERA IRBs in fiscal year 23 compared to the prior year. Both these programs are on their way to winding down and completing, so that's why the decrease. Additionally, there's a $1.3 million combined decrease in program and general and admin expenses, and the main driver of this was due to our actuarial determined OPEB and pension expenses decreasing from the prior year. Further, there was a $0.9 million increase in cost of goods sold energy systems, which is the exact opposite of the revenue that we discussed in the previous slide of the PPA projects sold to IPC. And the last bullet here is that there's a $5.1 million increase in the provision for loan losses. This is due to fiscal year 22, and it stands out on this slide as that big negative number. We wrote down some COVID-19 pandemic reserves in the prior year, where the losses that we anticipated and reserved for didn't materialize as we expected. So the increase this year is just kind of going back to a positive number due to our increase in our total loan receivable portfolio. Next slide. Our non-operating expenses decreased $1.8 million from the prior year. There's a $1.2 million increase in interest income, which is like our bank interest due to just a macroeconomic higher interest rate environment in fiscal year 23 than in the prior year. There was a $0.8 million decrease in interest expense due mostly to the large prepayment on the Shrek ABS bond. There was a $300,000 decrease in distributions to member due to the completion of the priority return payments for SL2 tax equity program, solar lease 2, in December of 2022. And there was a $500,000 decrease in unrealized gain of interest rate swaps due to the rising interest rate. Next slide. And this all led to our net position increasing about $30.3 million year over year. And you see it throughout each entity. There's a big increase in CT Green Bank of 21 million due to 22.3 million of operating income. There was a $3.6 million increase in Shrek ABS1 due to rec sale income in excess of interest expense on the bond. There's a $3.1 million increase in Shrek Warehouse 1 due to rec sale income in excess of limited operating expenses. And there are no draws on the outstanding line of credit on the entity. And there's a $1.2 million increase in Cephia Holdings due to loan portfolio interest and income from non-Shrek rec sales. And then further, there was a $2.3 million increase in restricted for energy programs net position, which really just ties into an increase in restricted cash. for various programs. And we see it mostly in CGB and in Shrek Warehouse 1. Next slide. So some required audit communications include our main estimates are related to net pension and OPEB liabilities, and these are actuarially determined. So they're not our estimates, but they are estimates in the report. The allowance for uncollectible accounts and the asset retirement obligation. Our auditors presented to the ACG that all our disclosures were neutral, consistent, and clear. The management representations were requested and there were no material uncorrected misstatements. And they wanted to note that there was a past adjustment related to us including some deferred financing fees on Solar Lease 2, which is a FASB program that should be taken out for GASB, but it was small enough underneath the threshold that they were okay passing on adjusting. Next slide. And this is the slide that includes our contact information for Joe Santafanti and Catherine Patnaud, our key members at PKF O'Connor Davies, if anybody wants it. And before we get to the resolution, if anybody has any questions, be happy to oblige.
Hey, Dan,
Yeah,
this is John Harity. When you say that it was an unmodified opinion,
yeah,
that means that they found no reason to modify it, right?
correct. That's like the highest audit standard.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
No problem.
Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Dan, it's Matt Rinelli. Yeah, it seems like a very good year. I just to clarify on that provision for loan loss.
Yeah.
That's not those numbers don't actually reflect losses. It's just accounting for what we have to set aside for loan loss reserves. Is that
Correct.
accurate? Okay.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
So
And,
our expense this year is related to our whole portfolio increasing, and we take a percentage of each.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great job, everybody. Not going to ask questions about how we did more with less, but I guess the one question is on the 59 million unrestricted. Should we? I don't know how much we want to have unrestricted, but should we be looking at how to push some of that money out the door, or restrict it, or is that more than we usually carry in unrestricted?
I mean, that's for the whole team, but I think we're always looking for more investments, right? It doesn't necessarily relate to the cash balance. It's more of like the net position, which it just basically means our balance sheet is pretty strong.
Yep.
There is, Dan, help me out here. I forgot what footnote it is, but there is a footnote with respect to the commitments the Green Bank has for staff and board approved transactions that is pretty substantial that I don't believe can be reported on the balance sheet. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Where we've committed the funds via board approval, but the actual recognition of sending them out hasn't occurred yet. So we have a footnote that includes what we call unfunded commitments for incentives and for loans.
Okay, I was just looking at the big number and having flashbacks to having our accounts swept. I won't say rated.
Yeah, right.
So do we have any questions, observations about Resolution 5 before I ask for a motion to approve?
The other comment I guess I would just generally make is that we just reviewed all the financial statements of the organization, which are about 120 pages of the report. There are about another 250 pages of the report that are the non-financial statistics. They're all the social and environmental impact of the report. So it's just a big kudos to the team. I know Jane is not here with us today. She's out, unfortunately, dealing with a family emergency. Dan, thank you for stepping in, and Eric and the data team So this is a big effort to pull all this information together. But it's a great report.
Yeah, well, and given what we've been through over the past few years, it's even more remarkable. We did this, and one of the worst things to confront our nation in history. So do I hear a motion to approve resolution 5?
Motion.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second, Matt.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Oppose? Abstaining? It's good. Moving on.
This is going to be Joe Buonanno, the employee handbook.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. Okay. Joe. Are you there we're going to talk about the employee handbook?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you can.
All right, great. Morning, everyone. I'm Joe Buonanno. I'm a Senior Manager of Operations at the Green Bank. Good to be with everyone today. So I have a few slides with regards to updates to our employee handbook. The revisions that we're proposing that we brought to the Audit Compliance and Governance Committee at their most recent meeting earlier this month are in two sections. One is regarding some wording in the handbook, and the other is some edits to policies and procedures. So beginning with the wording, we've made a few updates throughout. We're recommending replacing all references to CGB with Green Bank to align with the Green Bank's brand guidelines. We're also replacing all references to he or he/she with they or their to align with the Green Bank's commitment to be ready, which was the initiative that we're currently going through with regards to education around belonging, racial equity, access, diversity, and inclusion. We've also recommended revisions to position titles to align with the current titles. So changing things like president to president and CEO, and managing director of operations to vice president of operations. And then just some miscellaneous non-material changes to sentence structure and formatting, just to improve readability of the full document. So those are changes to wording. There's some changes throughout the other policies and procedures sections. First, clarifying that our expense reporting process for employees and employee requests for time off are now automated through our Microsoft SharePoint system. Those were previously done more manually, so we've automated those processes. We've also added Juneteenth to the list of company holidays for Public Act 22-128. And then we are amending the education assistance policy. We're doing so to align our cost per credit hour limit for undergraduate and graduate courses with that of the University of Connecticut. So what that means is that we're taking the specific dollar amount cap that we currently have, which is below the UConn limit, and aligning it with that. So as UConn changes their cost per credit hour, our policy will be aligned with that. We're also clarifying that any non-credit hour based tuition can be approved by manager discretion based on the relevance to the employee's current position, their current job responsibilities, and their promotional path. So making clear that if they enter into any certificate program or any other non-degree program or non-credit hour based program, that it needs to be aligned with either their current role or where their job is growing into. We've added an employee benefit for gym membership limited to our gym here in the Hartford complex. There's one next door in the Capewell lofts, as well as a gym local to the Stamford office. So any employees who are interested in participating in either of those gyms would have their cost covered by the organization. And then lastly, we've redesigned our mobile device management policy, which I will talk about in this final slide, which is we're introducing a new mobile application called Company Portal. This came as a recommendation from our external IT consultant, AdNet, in order for staff to access Green Bank data. So their Microsoft Outlook, their Microsoft Teams, which has phone or chat, or SharePoint, if they use that mobile application on either their personal phone or their tablet, they would need to enroll in this mobile application called Company Portal. What that does is just an extra layer of IT security, but we've made very clear, and we will make very clear to the full staff before rolling this out, that it does not allow for the Green Bank administration or IT to view someone's personal browsing history on their personal device, their personal emails, documents, contacts, or calendar. We cannot access their passwords, their photos, or their location. But what it does allow for IT and the administration to do is track things like the serial number, identify the device by name, and then importantly, if an employee leaves the organization or is terminated, IT would have the ability to remotely clear the data, the Green Bank data on that device. As well as if that phone is lost or stolen, IT can do that as well with the employee's approval. So it's just an added layer of security if there's particularly a break in employment. With that, I'm happy to take any questions. Those are the proposed edits to our handbook.
I just have one question. On the third bullet on the right, it says reset lost or stolen device to factory settings. That's of someone's personal device. Are you saying that you could reset their personal device?
So this would allow for IT to reset that personal device, but what we've outlined and what we would ensure in our policy is that we would only reset the lost or stolen device to factory settings with written approval by the employee. So if they lost their phone, they said, yeah, if they said, it's okay to wipe my full device, we can. Otherwise, we would limit the wiping to just the Green Bank data, so the Teams app, the Outlook app.
Okay, it does create a gap if they don't and it is stolen. Okay, just figured. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other observations or questions? Okay, do I hear a motion to approve Resolution 6?
My motion to approve.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Opposed? Abstaining? All right. Excellent.
Boy, this is John. I voted aye.
Got you, John.
What did you say?
He voted aye.
Oh, we did. Okay, thank you, John. Okay, this next item involves, let's see. Well, it actually involves a meeting to really formalize the legislative process and actually get the board more involved and up to speed on what's going on, when it's going on, and, if possible, how, we might get in there and, help steer things in the right direction, and also not have some of our statutes changed, without our knowledge or participation. So let's see, do we want to have Brian and James talk about this?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everyone. James DeSantos, Legislative Liaison. I'm going to be walking through the one slide that Brian and I prepared. So the Legislative Board Process Memo was prepared by Brian Farnan and myself and was presented before the ACG Committee on October 10th of this year. The initiative, as Chair Reed alluded to, was to begin an effort to create greater transparency and engagement throughout the organization, while trying to continuously foster and strengthen our relationships with like-minded organizations in the field and with executive branch agencies within the state, such as DEEP, PURA, OPM, AG, and DOT, depending on what their agenda is for that session. The objective of developing the memo is primarily to create a systematic process and associated timeline to align with important annual legislative deadlines, such as when bills are to be voted out of committee, public hearings, to create transparency and engagement throughout the organization. It's It prevents, the document is a combination of what was done historically at the Green Bank, what was implemented for the first time in the 2023 legislative session, which was my first session at the Green Bank, and recommendations for the upcoming 2024 legislative session. So it began with developing a process and timeline to align with 4 important items, which was the Connecticut legislative session deadlines, which the 2024 session is set to begin in February. It is to align with the regularly scheduled board of directors and ACG committee meetings. The fall and winter is the legislative session prep, which we are in the middle of right now, and then the winter and spring execution. The goal is to achieve these by formalizing processes to 5 key issues. The first being pre-session, which establishes regularly scheduled meetings with senior staff to identify legislative priorities. We will convene these meetings every Monday and Friday. Last session, we met every Friday. We determined that we needed to increase the frequency of those meetings to align with not only the fast pace that is up there, but also with the public hearing schedule, which I'll get into later. We'll seek recommendation from ACG committee to present to Green Bank Board of Directors for approval on major legislative issues, of which the Green Bank will be taking the lead on, and to establish frequent and regularly scheduled outreach to not only legislators, but also to relevant state agencies. To formalize the process to meet with DECD, to meet with DEEP, to meet with OPM, and formalize that process so we're all on the same page. The second point is the bill tracking and policy development. We're going to be expanding the viewership of the interactive bill tracking spreadsheet, which last session was located on the OneDrive, and I updated on a daily basis during the legislative session. The goal is to provide access to all Green Bank staff and board members to encourage engagement in the legislative process. We will seek comments from staff, which we will incorporate into the spreadsheet into 3 separate and distinct categories: clean energy, infrastructure, and quasi-agency legislation. We will also, out of session, which is next year will be from May until December, we will formalize monthly meetings with DEEP, Governor's Office, and other legislative partners on a monthly basis. In session, we will formalize weekly update meetings with DEEP and other legislative partners on a weekly basis. The third item is public hearing. So we review all legislation that has been placed on public hearing agendas during a regular scheduled meeting. Last session, as I said, we're going to increase the frequency of that to Mondays and Fridays with senior staff. The process for written testimony will remain the same. It'll be drafted by the legislative liaison and then distributed to the Green Bank officers for comments, review, and final sign off for submission. This has not changed. The live testimony portion, we made a modification to, and it's a significant addition. If determined that live testimony is the proper course of action, then the issue is raised to the chair and the vice chair of the board, and then the chair and vice chair would then make a determination whether to raise the issue to the entire board for comments and feedback. They also would reserve the right to schedule a special meeting for the board if they feel that issue would require board approval. It's important to note that the board comments would need to be received within 48 hours to accommodate comments received. When public hearings are announced at the legislature, we are given 5 days to turn everything around. So it's a very short time frame. Point number 4 is regarding session updates. The legislative liaison will give monthly presentations to the chair of the board on all legislation that will have a material impact on either the mission, operations, or funding of the Green Bank. And the Green Bank Board of Directors and ACG Committee, a legislative update will be included in the regularly scheduled meetings. 5 is the last and final point, is the post-session, which the legislative liaison will prepare a legislative summary, which will coincide with public act numbers, gubernatorial signature or veto, and that report will be presented at the June meeting and then distributed to all Green Bank staff. So the legislative summary will include a summary of legislation, and it'll also importantly direct impacts to the organization and the industry with a link to the formal language and effective dates. So that's everything I have at this time. Brian Farnan, I don't know if you would like to add any comments to this, but we fully expect that this document will be modified and refined. It is a living, breathing document. We've already received comments from Deep and OPM, which will be incorporated. So I'll leave it up to Farnan and then answer any questions you may have.
No, that was perfect, James. Yeah, and I was just going to just make that one point, is that it's going to evolve over time as we, through the session and with feedback from the board and committee members.
Thanks, Brian. Any questions from anyone on the call?
This is John. I just wanted to stress the importance of lining up issues and approaches and alliances pre-session, because everything happens so quickly as the session begins that you're done before you get started if you don't get in there early. And so really you have to set the agenda before the legislative session begins, or you're really not going to be able to get a move much. So and so I like the idea of the of all this being more scheduled and people understanding the importance of that. Thanks.
Thanks, John. And I completely agree with you. Brian and I have been negotiating language, I think, the day after the last session ended. So it starts as soon as the last session ended, and everyone's prepared by the end of the year. So we will be prepared.
Well, maybe one other comment, just based on the conversation that was happening at the ACG committee meeting. As part of the materials in the front end, you saw the abridged version of the financial statements that are helping the board communicate certain financial messages, impact messages to their various stakeholders. So what we're going to work on this year is how to try to simplify this into a section of that as well, so that along with the quarterly reporting that we're doing on the financial statements and impact, we'll probably have a single page that's simplified on what's happening on the legislative stuff process in that, so you have that as well.
I think also one of the discussions we had was if we're going to subject people to testifying live, we want to make sure we're up to speed on any surprises that might kind of erupt.
All the way up to the 15
having
minutes
anchored
before you're up on stage.
shared some of these things. So it's kind of good if everything's up to speed in those. And actually, Green Bank did really well last session in terms of because of the fact that we've been so helpful to so many legislators. They were very thankful, and so we actually looked pretty good. It's scary. He was waiting for the other shoe to drop, but no. So this is all good stuff.
Great. Thank you.
So do I hear a motion to approve Resolution 7?
I motion.
Right, with enthusiasm.
I love legislative process.
Do you hear a second?
Second, Adrian. Second.
A third and a fourth. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Oppose? Abstaining? Okay, great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for all that work.
James.
I know that was hard. You guys were diving deep into that. Okay. So our next environmental infrastructure programs, is that where we are?
We are on the bottom of page 5, agenda item 4D, impact methodology updates with Eric.
Oh, okay. Eric.
I'm
we
here.
Need your impact
Madam
methodology.
Thank you. So as you all are aware, we have an evaluation framework, which is kind of the formal way that we talk about our impact and what we've actually done, not just in terms of the raw energy and projects that we've delivered, but how that has further impacts on society and communities and individuals, so on and so forth. We've built out methodologies around energy, so looking at quantifying what we've delivered, what that saved for people. We've talked about air quality in the environment, public health. We talk about economic impacts of this. Today, I want to focus right here on our methodology for emissions and air quality and some updates to that. So next slide. So we have been using a methodology that we put in place in 2017. We converted from the EPA's eGrid model to the REVERT model. We adopted that after reviewing it with DEEP, the EPA, and having that approved through the ACG committee and the board. Basically, AVERT is the Avoided Emissions Reduction Tool, and it looks at what was not fired up based off of the merit order stack and the emissions that would have come from that in terms of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxides, and particulate matter. We built our own operationalization off of that. Basically, we did a big statistical regression that developed factors so that we could easily implement this. It was an easier way to code it. We worked that out. We reviewed it with DEEP. We reviewed it with the EPA. The EPA liked it so much they adopted it and they built their own. What I'm coming to bring today is saying, hey, we no longer want to have to do the exercise of developing our own factors. We can just use EPA's. It's going to save staff time on doing that update. The EPA tool has been upgraded far beyond what it was 6 years ago. So now it doesn't just look at CO2, SO2, and NOx and particulate matter. It's also taking into account the emissions of volatile organic compounds as well as ammonia. And the public health model that we use, COBRA, the co-benefits risk assessment, takes those into account. So this allows us to get a more complete picture. So not huge changes, but just wanted to bring that to the board anyway. Next slide. So that brings us to the resolution. And
any questions, observations, concerns? Okay, hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve resolution 8?
So moved. John Hardy.
Thanks, John. Do I hear a second?
Second, Matt.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Okay, resolution 8. Now I think we got a Mackie, right, for,
Yes. Thank you,
Yeah.
Carrie. Good morning. Good morning,
Hi,
everyone.
yes.
Can you hear
I'm
me
gonna hear
okay?
your report out.
Great.
We
Can you
can
hear me
hear you.
okay? Okay, great.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chair Reed. I'm going to do a quick update on how we're doing at the end of the first quarter of the fiscal year, and then Elise Buzelli will present a CPACE project for approval. So hopefully you can read these numbers. But at a high level, the first progress targets there is the overall sort of consolidation of all our programs. For being close to, or being a quarter of the way through the year, we're around where we want to be. 32% of our project goal, 23% of our capital deployed goal, and 20% of our solar goal. Some of those obviously are slightly below a quarter, but I think that's expected given what's doing well programmatically and what's not, which we'll get into. So let's jump down to the line item breakout of our programs. We'll start with CPACE, where our overall goal is 19 projects for 21.2 million. On the project side, we've done 8 for a total capital deployed of 10.5 million. So, in great shape there for the first quarter, and that's primarily driven by green bank activity. You might recall that CPACE, there's really 2 components to that goal. There is the Green Bank projects where we originate those, we fund, and then there is the third-party lenders where we play more of a passive role. We're the administrator of the program. The capital providers are out there in the market working on their own projects, and they bring them to us for approval and levying of the lien. So we don't have a lot of control aside from designing a great program, which I'm pretty confident we have. We don't have a lot of control over how they do. They are, I think, they're focused mainly on new constructions and rehabs, given sort of where that market is now. They're a little behind target, but on our end, we're doing great, especially on the capital deployed side. For the Green Bank funded goal projects, we have a goal of 15 projects, and we have done 6 projects, which is 40% of that target. And on the capital deployed side, we have a goal of 7.7 million, and we've actually done 6.24 million. So that's 81% of our Green Bank goal. That's due really just because the projects this year that we've funded have been abnormally high. When you look at the previous 3-year average, our project size has been our average project size has been 520,000. This year we're looking at a $1 million average project size. So that's what's led to that, aggressive progress towards our capital deployed goal. And we've got a great pipeline right now. The NRES, the Non-Residential Energy Solutions Program, which is the solar incentive program for the C&I market, those awards for the final auction this year are about to be made in the next 2 weeks. We've got a lot of projects that once they get an award are going to move forward. So we think thanks to that, as well as some good energy efficiency progress, that we'll be in great shape for our goal. On the SBA side, you see the numbers at 33% on the project, just under 25% on the capital deployed. That's where we want to be. We've executed a purchase of loans from Eversource, so we'll plan to do 3 more and hopefully bring us by the end of the year in line with that target. The other 2, the commercial lease and PPA, and then our multifamily term. No projects yet on the multifamily side. That's really our lease, which we've got a pretty good pipeline of projects there. We're hoping to put our first, we're negotiating to finalize our first lease now, and plan to apply for the ITC low income adder for that one. So that would be our first project and our first low income ITC project. So as that market continues to develop, should be able to make some progress towards that goal. On the commercial PPA, it's not surprising that we haven't done any projects. It's really, this target's driven primarily by our solar map work and our lending to other third-party owners, and that really all comes in big chunks. On the solar map side, we sign those contracts sort of in lumps, and we're working on a state portfolio now, which would I'm signing those, which would really make a lot of progress towards that target. And then we're negotiating debt with several new third-party owners. So once we would sign those, you'd see sort of go from 0 to bigger numbers on that goal. So overall, I think for quarter way through the year, we're in pretty good shape with really that CPACE over performance that's allowing us at the top line financing programs goal to be in good shape. I'll pause for any questions.
Yeah, I have a question. I mean, great work, especially where we are in the year and the targets. I guess my only question is multifamily term. That's the Smart E-Loan program. Is two-part question. One, the target seems rather low, 3, but also why? I mean, there's a lot of I guess these are developers who need to leverage the so is it a awareness problem? Is it a environmental problem with finance from third party? I'm just wondering why.
So on the first part, the Smart E loan is single family. And I think Sergio will cover that one. That program is actually going gangbusters. And within you're right, there's a much higher target there. They're doing great. So this is really just our solar lease product in this market, which is still, we've spent the last, at this point, 2 years doing the statutory and then regulatory work to create this market. But it's still pretty nascent. So yeah, I think it's primarily an awareness problem, which we've got a position that we're hiring for now. We'll be rolling out our solar map program, or expanding the solar map program into this sector. So yeah, especially since Pura just last week released their draft decision for next year RES, and they increased the incentive rate pretty substantially. It went from 32 cents to just over 37 cents. And now that we see the ITC adders coming into effect, and I just mentioned that application window for the low income one opened up, I think we'll start to see projects finally, but I've been talking about this for a while, but we'll finally start to see projects move. All that said, yes, 3 is a low goal. It's really, they take a extensive amount of time to develop. The one that we're negotiating now that I mentioned, we've been talking to them for, I think, about 6 months, and we still haven't even signed the lease. And there's still a lot of work to do to get that project to fruition. So, hopefully we'll get to the 3 this year, and then we'll have the infrastructure in place to really scale that goal for that market.
Right. And just one more follow up, and then I'm done. So the investment tax credits, the ITC coming out of the IRA, the EJA, I know Brian and I have been talking a lot about this. We have this window of opportunity that might go away, especially president changes, we don't know, deployment of capital, government shutdowns, all that. So I guess that's the urgency, at least at DECD, we feel, of getting multi-family, again, however the DECD can help. But just the question I have is, this is 30 to 60% with the adders, right? Where you can get.
That's right.
Right. And then if I understand this right, because the coal-fired plant in Bridgeport, that's where you get to that 60%, right? The 45 to 60%. So I've been pushing this message through DECD with the federal funds group all over the state. So again, however the DECD can help get awareness out, and if we could revise, that's a question, is that target revisable, the 3?
So let me throw some thoughts out, Mac, and you help me here. So I suspect that looking ahead, this target's going to grow dramatically because a lot of energy is being put into it. We have a lot of tailwinds, to your point, coming to our backs. Yes. This is the hardest market ever to penetrate, is tenant residing multifamily affordable housing. So we've got a lot of good things in our that are going to help us. The residential renewable energy solutions with the high tariff is going to lift more economic benefit to projects. Pura is in a draft decision now where they're proposing increasing that even further. And then we've got all the federal tax credits on energy communities, 10%, on low income, 10 to 20%. So when you start putting all those things together into a financing product for what are 1,300 plus properties around the state, more than 80,000 units, and our agencies working together, what I hear you saying, Commissioner, is we got to bring DECD, Mackey into the DOHD, Pura, CHAFA, HUD group, so that we're all lifting this market up, because it's super important. An observation, and I'm not sure if it's the right observation that I have, is that I think a lot of brownfields have or are being converted into housing.
Yeah.
So there's a linkage between brownfield remediation, just like I'm looking at our DECD backed former brownfield, and it does qualify into this program. So yes, like we feel really good. It's the really hard market to get to. This is really like I think when we set this goal, we weren't, all the federal stuff was starting to kick in.
Right.
But yeah.
Hey,
I understand.
Brian, This is Matt. Could I, and I'm happy, if that was Hank, I'm happy to talk offline. I obviously do a lot of affordable housing work. And I would say maybe a strategy might be to go to urban city planners like the City of New Haven, City of Bridgeport, and do a sort of education session, because a lot of, other than the very sophisticated regional and national developers, that's the first stop for a lot of the sort of local developers who are still developing, 50, 100 unit projects. And if we can get some success stories, it's a copycat, area. But I think educating planners, because, for example, New Haven just passed a requirement that if you're building in almost any location in New Haven, you have to have either 5 or 10% affordable housing, period. Not as part of any program, just that's that. So everyone's looking for a way to improve their capital stack. And this might be, rather than sort of a broad, broad shot approach, maybe a more focused approach to get the ball rolling. And places like Start Bank, which is a community bank, the old New Haven Savings, they have a mission where they are required to lend to these areas and these types of projects. And they know, the 30 or 40 builders. So I think maybe a surgical approach. And on the brownfields, I'd just be careful, because it's great need and it is a great project, but the as we know, for example, from projects we've gotten involved in, it does increase the degree of difficulty, and we want to help those projects certainly. But if we're looking for some projects that are going to pencil out easier and don't have to remediate to the residential standard, we should also focus on sites that aren't brownfields, because they're just going to be quicker to completion than these other projects. And once we get some completed, we can use those as featuring them and educating people. My thoughts.
And I just wanted to build on what he's saying. It's Mrs. Lonnie speaking. Not just affordable housing, but multi-family housing and retrofitting those things, starting to jump, but also retrofitting. One of the huge issues that I see is kind of not understanding who these companies are. So they're going to come in, they're going to build this. Who's going to manage it? What is that? Is the city planner going to manage it now? Who's going to run it? And that was the confusion around how it works, and developing a level of trust in these companies, in the process, and in when they go away to find a new project. What are you left with?
They're too small.
And and are we getting the most modern solar panels, for instance? Are we getting those ones manufactured in the 60s that they're trying to unload? What are we getting, and how can we make it really cutting edge, but also, create a communication that works better? Because everybody, when they get scared, they just, let's put it off.
Right. Well, I appreciate, I just think like there's such a window of opportunity. Yeah. How do we?
Our goals, like 15%, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
We can't do that without, getting all these, and we've got to really make that happen and fast track it and find out what's the holdup and go there and fix it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I recognize the goal is low. I think part of it was when we set it, this was a very new market. It still is. It's a recognition that developing these are going to take probably 9, 12, 18 months. So, the outreach that we're starting now, we're talking to the New Haven Housing Authority, the Bridgeport Housing Authority. Brian just presented to Cost yesterday and sort of did a soft rollout of our map expansion. We've got well over a dozen conversations with different owners as well as housing authorities to educate them about this new change. But just given the complexities of these projects, getting consent from the tax investors on the LIHTCs, getting consent from all the debt investors, and just navigating the especially with housing authorities, just the I'm not gonna say bureaucracy, but just the different stakeholders there. It just takes an extensive amount of time. Plus, put on top of that, dealing with the IRS plus all the federal tax adders. So I feel the urgency. take on all this. The planning, Matt, we hadn't thought about the planning I don't know, directors or staff. We've been dealing, like I said, mainly with on the housing authority side. We'll have to make sure that whatever they're requiring of their new multifamily properties in terms of affordability actually qualifies them statutorily or meets the pure affordability requirements to make them eligible for the program. I mean, 10-15% is not gonna get there in terms of getting them into RS. So maybe we use maybe we think about a change there and just sending the money to the low income tenants so that we could unlock those sort of those properties as well.
Okay.
And then I saw the note about including HUD. Yeah, the HUD, they're part of our RS working group. The director recently has been sent to DC to work for the overall sustainability director, but she's still involved in our conversations as part of the working group. And yeah, would love to see about getting DCD involved in that.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Great.
I flagged that. We'll do it December and mark what's happening and just show the opportunity and the challenges. Mac, I just flagged that. We'll spend a longer time. Yeah.
And I think I'm going to do something in March, like diving deep on this, bringing companies into the process so that they're up to speed on what has to happen.
We've got great teams.
Yeah.
They're all working,
Yeah.
as Mackie's suggesting right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing, let's bring DECD into that because we can just be a megaphone everywhere. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right, Mac. C-PACE.
Yep, I'll turn it over to Elise.
Great. Thanks, Mackie. Good morning, everybody. Elise Bizzelli on the financing programs team. We're coming to you today with a C-PACE transaction in Winchester. All right. So this is for the Gilbert School. Gilbert School is located in the Winstead section of Winchester. It's a private school with students from 7th to 12th grade, and it also includes some international students from 6 different countries this year, which is pretty cool. And we're requesting a conditional approval from the board that will be contingent on the property owner receiving that NRES award that Mackie was saying it should be coming out in the next couple of weeks from the most recent August auction. So the Gilbert School is looking to finance about 1.35 million for 2 rooftop solar PV systems with bifacial panels totaling 415 kW. They're also replacing their roof and installing a white reflective roof membrane that will help with both the efficiency of the heating and cooling inside the building, and also will contribute to the PV production with the bifacial panels. Next slide.
Back to the panels.
And then I think I will turn it over quickly to David Beach if he's on. Talk about this.
I'm here, Elise. Thanks. Yeah, so I'll just speak quickly to the underwriting we did for this project. As Elise mentioned, this project is at the Gilbert School. So the building is actually operated and maintained by the school, but the property is actually owned by a separate entity called the Gilbert Trust, which maintains an endowment, and it uses the proceeds from that endowment to offer college scholarships to graduating seniors and actually maintain that international student program, which Elise mentioned. So staff looked at both that trust corporation, which owns the property, and the Gilbert School, which will be responsible for making these C-PACE payments. It is a unique structure. So the school is incorporated as a nonprofit, but it actually functions as the sole public school for grades 7 to 12 in the town of Winchester. That means the annual tuition revenue is a line item in the Board of Education budget, which is then approved by the Board of Education and then eventually approved by the town selectmen and voters of the town in the annual budget referendum. So we also looked at the general credit rating of the town of Winchester, which received a AA rating from S&P in its most recent bond issuance earlier this spring. So that on top of the small 11% loan to value gave the financing team confidence in this transaction. Happy to answer any questions about the underwriting if there are any.
Great. Thank you, David.
Back to you, Elise.
Thanks. All right, we'll go to the next slide. So just again, looking for that 1.35 million for the project here. Next slide, I think is the, yeah, so the summary sheet. So this is the summary sheet for the diligence memo. Just a few things to point out here. The property did not turn up any environmental incidents, and there is no property secured debt. And also to mention, this project is being constructed by Greenleaf Energy Solutions. They're a very active contractor with the CPACE program and other building solution programs. And they also were a recipient of one of our Green Bank Awards last year. So happy to see them bringing us lots of projects. And then as you can see here, and as David pointed out in his memo, you can see that the project is not currently showing an SIR of greater than of 1 or greater. And that's, you know, at the full project cost here of 1.35. This is due to the fact that the contractor is still working through some of the energy savings calculations with our technical administration partner. We feel pretty confident that we'll be able to get there. They're just working through those. And the SIR will be greater than 1 once those roof savings are included. But if not, then we will be able to slightly reduce the amount in CPACE financing. It should be about less than $100,000 that the property owner would have to contribute in equity and get us to a point where the project will pencil. And I think that is it. I think next slide is the resolution. So back to you, Chair Reed.
Okay, so any observations or questions about any of this?
Yeah, this is John. Just to note that Connecticut has, I don't know if it's an unusual number, but Connecticut has a lot of private schools. And so especially if this works out well for the school, and if we're able to share the project, that, you know, the information about the project with other schools, you know, there's a lot of institutions that we could then approach about the same type of thing. And some of the schools, like Watkinson School in Hartford, they tend to be progressive in their approach, and so this would be right up their alley, I would think. So I think it's a great potential market, not just a one-off.
Thanks, John. Anybody else?
That's a great point. We'll get this one done, and then I think we've done 1 or 2 other private schools over the years. So put together a case study, and they've got to have an association or something that we could get in front of. And
yeah, there's the Connecticut Association of Independent Schools. Yeah. And they're actually pretty sophisticated. They used to contract all energy for their schools, so they're I think they'd be receptive.
Great. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or observations or recommendations?
I'll actually just say one more thing, just building on what what John said. So yeah, it's a really good point, especially with CPACE financing. Now that we've got the direct pay available for the ITC, that's really what's making the nonprofit projects viable for CPACE financing and ownership. So it's a great point. It's, you know, this will be the first private, as Maggie mentioned, we've done 1 or 2, but this will be the first private school we've done where they're receiving the direct pay. So great point. We might really have some legs to stand on now.
Just for, you struck my thought here, just to announce, I'm actually one of the main speakers at Foxwoods for the Connecticut Association of Independent Schools.
Oh, my God. Great.
So yeah, so I'll be
So make a
speaking.
pitch.
I would need assistance on the pitch. So this is my point. So Alexandra and I are invited to a lot of things. So if there's something that you would like me to drop in, I'll gladly share this after. I think it is, anyway, I'll share that out afterwards.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we can draw some attention to the program.
Timing.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? Okay, resolution 9. Do I hear a motion to approve?
I motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstaining? Okay, great.
Right, all right. So we are on agenda item number 6, and let's see, I will, a few announcements, and then I'll do this real quickly because we've got to get to the Circa presentation. We're running behind. So let's see, Sergio sends his regards. He's out sick today, so I'll do a quick report out. And then just a quick reminder, we have the ethics training from 11 to 12 for those who are gonna participate in that. Let's go to the next slide there, Joe. Just at a high level, the information is in the packet. The Smarty loan is doing great with respect to the first quarter results. We are looking to reset that target in January to increase it, to continue to bring momentum. On the Energy Storage Solutions Program, which is our incentive program that we co-administer with the utilities, we are currently in an annual review process. I think Pura will have a draft decision out sometime probably next week, and then a final decision sometime in November, late November. The commercial market segment is doing great. We're ahead of targets. We're seeing much larger projects than we anticipated, but megawatt-wise, we're seeing larger projects. They still have to work themselves through the interconnection queues with the EDCs. And then on the residential side, really slow uptake. With the annual review process, there will be some structural changes that will help. There might be some incentive changes that will help. We stood high on the backs of vulnerable communities to lift incentives there. So we'll see how that plays out. But this is a hard market too to figure out, because I don't think people recognize the importance of resilience yet. And I'll give a quick example. There's a metric called the connection rate, which is the percentage of projects where solar and battery storage are connected. In California, they have a connection rate of 90%. That's because their net metering rules have changed, and they almost require storage being paired with batteries in order to get retail rates. In Puerto Rico, that connection rate is almost 100% because resilience to them is life. In Connecticut, our connection rate is less than 1%. So we're working through all of it, just to give a sense, right? Like it can be structural, it can also be life. So we're trying to navigate that. So anyways, that's just a quick update. Sergio will do a much fuller one when he's back here in December. But let's go to the next slide and head over to Eric. Eric, you want to handle this quick update? And then Bert, if we could speed it up.
Sure, I'll make this really quick. Basically, we are 17% of the way to the target for the year in terms of capital deployment, in terms of committing and investing our own money and building our balance sheet. So we have closed or committed transactions for 5.4 million against a target of about 31 million. The majority of this comes from CPACE, and with about $500,000 coming from our facility with Amalgamated. This will be even more after today's transactions are approved. Thanks.
All right.
Yeah, 7B.
Okay, that's Bert.
The C4C Smarty financing. Bert.
Facility modification. Bert.
Okay,
Is he there?
good morning, Chair. Oops.
Good morning.
Okay, so that should take care of the feedback. Can you hear me now?
We can.
We can.
I'm sorry, you can hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you, Bert.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Okay, yes, Capital for Change, the largest CDFI in the state of Connecticut, and also the largest Smart E lender by outstanding level of loans in that program, has come to us. So we to increase a facility that the Green Bank has in partnership with Amalgamated Bank to C4C to fund the Smart E loans, as well as a few other energy efficiency loans under a borrowing-based facility. So what you see there in the middle of the screen is the original facility we had with C4C shared by Amalgamated and Green Bank. We revised that in December of 2022 because of interest rate stress. And you can see where the interest rate would have been had we not changed that facility, would have been averaging about 8.6%. It is now averaging a cost of 5.2%, which fits very well with the Smarty loans, which are in the approximate 5.5% to 6.5% range, and those rates have actually been increased a little bit since the board passed on that a couple months ago. So we're now being approached by C4C due to an increase in Smart E demand owing to two key factors. One is the heat loan, which they also service, has been seeing a decrease in demand and a shift in demand over to Smart E because of the way the heat loan processes or evaluates savings and an ability to pay. Because it's not a FICO-based approval, it is more based on whether you have paid your electric bill or not. But there's also a determination to see if the improvement that you're having in the household is providing enough savings to the family, and that's determined as a minimum 1-to-1 savings ratio. It seems that heat pumps, owing to the high cost of electricity in the state, is causing a majority of those heat pump installations to fail that test. So those customers are now shifting over to Smart E. There's also a capacity in terms of the heat loan maxes out at 15,000, and a number of these transactions, when you're doing whole house changeovers to heat pumps, exceed the $15,000 level. So previously that would have been shared between the heat loan and Smart E. Now what they're seeing is it come over exclusively to Smart E. So hence the need for an additional $5 million to their existing $25 million facility, which we're proposing that the Green Bank provide on a 50-50 basis with Amalgamated, and Amalgamated has agreed to this change, and so they would be processing the adjustment along with us, just depending upon the outcome of the meeting today here. So with that, their C4C's financial condition is stable as represented in the financial statements included in the memo, and so all else is good. The portfolio stats in terms of loan losses is actually lower than it was a year ago, which is a good trend, and also that loss rate is in keeping with expectations for loan losses generally in the Smart E portfolio, so no differences there. So we're comfortable with this increase, and we fully support it and recommend it to the board for approval. Any questions? happy to address.
Bert, I have a question. This is John Harity. If so, the heat pumps run on electricity, right? Is that the deal?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
And so but the cost of electricity going up would only impact people if they're on the grid. This is so these are people that are putting in heat pumps but are not using solar.
Right. But the analysis, I believe the analysis that is done, John, is based on the cost of energy at the grid, not the implied cost through solar.
I mean, because if you do the whole package, if I would think if I was motivated enough to do a heat pump, I would have already done solar, and then the cost of electricity for that customer is not the same as standard rate or anything like that. So seems like an odd thing to me.
Yeah, it's a good point, but I think we have to bear in mind that only about Brian Garcia, I think the figure is 10 to 20% of homes are really fully eligible for solar, on there in terms of orientation of rooftops and things of that sort. So, the majority of homes are actually not going to be able to be in a situation where they would be using solar directly.
And how do we have a sense of how many homes are installing heat pumps?
No, I don't. I don't have that off the top of my head. No.
Can I chime in for a second? This is Adrienne.
Sure.
We've been working with Energize Connecticut and have just passed an MOU to expand the use of heat pumps in our region. Generally speaking, John, the heat pumps are going into homes that do not have solar and can't. So that's a very accurate perception, Bert. And they do, because they're operating on electricity, they're replacing fuel as a heat source. And they are providing both heating and cooling, which of course replaces also window air conditioners and other guzzlers of energy. So they have been fairly well embraced in the presentations that we have made. And the idea is percolating amongst homeowners because of the dual application, both heating and cooling, because they're completely electric and can operate at any time, and because people are really, really anxious to get rid of their old heating systems. In Bridgeport, as in most of Connecticut, oil is a predominant heating source, and so we have a long runway in terms of putting in heat pumps. And I don't think the interest in them is going to go away anytime soon. I don't have any stats on how many have been sold or how many have been installed. But I can tell you we have heat pumps at home at my house for the last 8 years. And they really do make a tremendous difference. And these are not the ones that are where you have to drill down. These are the ones that are posed outside their exchanges, that are posed outside of your house and ducted into the house. So I do understand the attraction that heat pumps have. What we're working on with Energize Connecticut is getting information into the communities.
Thank you. And I guess the only thing I would say is that if so many of the housing stock is not solar would not be an available option, that we need to be looking more than at shared solar and community solar and large scale solar, because otherwise basically we're saying to 85% of the housing stock that we don't have anything for you.
Well, they do have heat pumps.
I can't remember the last, but I think it was my last session. We said we had shared solar was a pilot project. And one of the last bills I took out was to make it, no, we've got shared solar now. And what, we only have one shared solar project in the state.
Yeah.
And that was a few years ago.
Oh, in the pilot. Yeah.
I mean, that's it. So, I mean, it just dropped dead again. The idea conceptually, but then it keeps dropping dead. So that's.
There are projects approved. Isabel Hazelwood, she used to work here. She's leading, I think, SCEP for Eversource. They've got approved projects. They're just working themselves through because they're big. They're large interconnections. Eventually they'll come online and customers will get their subscriber savings, 2.5 cents.
Just for point of reference for elevating everybody's hopes and you know, setting some optimistic targets. I mean, the state of Maine had a 100,000 heat pump installation by 2025 goal, and they blew right through that. They had enormous success and decided to set a new target based on that. So, you know, I agree with the comments that, you know, I don't think demand's going anywhere. I think there's going to be some federal incentives that are going to help continue to drive demand. We've got a new conservation and load management plan that'll be a new annual plan that'll be filed on or before November 1st, which will also be looking at this. And so, you know, this is a vital path forward for not only decarbonization, but, you know, stabilizing energy prices, because electricity is a regulated energy price. Whereas I remember when I had oil, wondering, you know, should I lock in now? Should I gamble? All of that. And so, yeah, it's good for the indoor air quality too, which is not something that we think enough about. But indoor air quality improves with these machines as well.
Chair Reed, I think we might be ready for the resolution.
Okay, so this is resolution 10. Yes, there. I'll just double check it.
Yes.
And this is
Right.
as a strategic selection, given special capabilities, strategic importance, urgency and timeliness, and multi-phase characteristics of the transaction, which was all explained in the memo.
Okay. So everything has to be copacetic for this to fully take place. Does anybody have any questions or observations? Okay. Hearing none, may I have a motion to approve resolution 10?
I give a motion to approve.
A second?
I'll second Adrian.
Thank you, Adrian.
You're welcome.
Okay. Somebody would be you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
And abstaining.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we're moving on to the butterfly facility modification. While Larry Campagna of the investment team will present, we're going to try to move this along briskly, but there is some background that is required. We've had a number of new directors join us since this was reviewed in April of 22. So Larry, would you provide the backdrop, and then I'll get into a discussion about a change that's been requested by Butterfly related to their new financing facility. Thanks.
Terrific. So on the next slide, Butterfly is an innovative Connecticut-based company that's primarily, but more than just, but primarily serving the quick service restaurant market. They take over a utility bill, they guarantee a certain decrease in the amount of energy consumed, and they invest in various energy saving measures which pay back over a 10-year contract. So the next slide will show our existing investment and relationship with the company. All of the equity and debt is held at the Butterfly level, and they take that capital and invest it into the equipment for Butterfly customers and are paid back over 10 years. Like I just said, it's innovative, but it is cash intensive due to the high upfront cost of the equipment. So the plan over the last year has been really taking off according to their budget. So I'll show you on the next slide. They've been enjoying 160% compound annual growth rate since 2019. You'll see there where we invested in a $5 million term loan along with Connecticut Innovations and Mizzen, and then there soon after, Partners Group committed a large amount, but in equity, both to take out the previous owner's position and also to invest in the growth of the company. You'll see on the map the scope geographically is really impressive with the company. They have over 4,500 customer sites active currently. So then on the next slide, we'll just go over really quickly to see the impact that's happened since we made our term loan investment last year. You see all the logos on the screen, but the ones in the middle are the ones that have happened just since we made our investments. You'll see 14 new companies have joined just in the last 12 months. So really impressive growth rate for the company, but with that growth rate comes an additional need for capital to purchase all the equipment. And so, Bert, we can discuss the proposed debt that has come up recently.
Yes, on the next slide. So they have come to us to say that it's actually a structure that we've generally been talking about with the company over a few years is what's really needed. So it would be a facility which has been proposed. Capital size is $200 million. The way the structure would work is they would establish an SPV for the senior debt, which is shown at the bottom right, where it says SPV senior with a collection account. And they would drop down the contracts that Larry referred to with the customers and use that as a security package. So the customer payments, instead of coming into Butterfly parent, would come instead down to the SPV level in a bankruptcy remote account, a bankruptcy remote entity with an account, a collection account that would be blocked. That would then flow through, the cash would flow through a senior cash waterfall for the benefit of the senior lenders, which would then go into a blocked account for the rest of the lenders, which includes Green Bank, Connecticut Innovations, Mizzen, and DECD, which has a 1.6 million loan tied to employment levels. And they've met, I believe, the first tier of those employment levels, so it's already started to become forgiven in part. So that's the general structure. So the lien that would be retained at the parent level would still be a lien up there on the assets there, including the ownership of the SPV, but you would have a subordinated interest effectively in those contracts through the SPV after the senior lenders take their senior slice of cash flow. So that's what's being presented here. I spoke both with Connecticut Innovations as well as Mizzen. Both are supportive as well as share our support for this change, and subject only to documentation which we would collectively agree. So that's the presentation here, and I'll leave that slide up in case there are any questions, hopefully quickly, so we can move to some other items on the agenda for approval. Thank you. Any questions from the board?
Question, Tom Flynn. Just checking. Okay. There are no questions or observations. Does that bring us to resolution 11?
That's the next slide. Yep.
Okay. So here's resolution 11. Observations, questions? Do I hear a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. A second?
We got enough? Hey, Chair, Madam Chair, it's
Yes.
Matt. I have to abstain just because of work we've done for Butterfly.
Okay.
Hopefully we have enough of a quorum.
We're all set. Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. Okay. Resolution 11, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, and Matt is abstaining.
Correct.
Okay. So now
I'm sorry to jump in. Was there enough of a quorum if I abstain as well?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to abstain from that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
abstention's fine. Yeah, that's Joanna. Was that Joanna?
Yes, Joanna, sorry.
Yeah.
And this is a strategic selection, just as a reminder.
Okay, good. Yeah. Good.
Okay, so we're on 7D.
7D, Louise.
Thank you.
Louise, you there? There you are.
Yeah,
There you are.
Hi. Yeah, good. So I'm presenting an overview of a proposed transaction with a special purpose vehicle of Sunwealth Power Inc. So background to this transaction is that the Green Bank for several years since 2018 has been providing term and construction financing to third-party solar developers. Got some names here: IPC, Skyview Ventures, and Sunwealth itself, who I'm here to talk about this morning. The latest development in our interaction with Sunwealth is that, having not closed any debt facilities with them since 2019, they did actually approach us this year and let us know that they're developing about 2.5 megawatts of solar projects in Connecticut that are going to come online in 2023 and 2024. And as a result, they're seeking a term financing facility. We like these projects. They're mission aligned in terms of serving what we would call underserved customers, like houses of worship, nonprofits. And they're also, the majority of them are located in vulnerable communities, so would contribute to Justice 40 targets. So following on from the memo that has been circulated, the request to the board here is to grant the investments team and staff the approval to conduct further due diligence on this opportunity to do a term financing facility in the amount of 4.2 million with a special purpose vehicle of Sunwealth. Next slide, please. This is an overview of what would be the proposed transaction structure. So this is what we would call a typical back leverage lending structure in the commercial solar sector, where there is a tax equity partnership to monetize the investment tax credit. So you can see that on the left-hand side, the green bank, the green box, it has 3 types of security basically associated with this debt facility. So there's a pledge of membership interests that comes from the Sunwealth special purpose vehicle. There's also a limited corporate parent guarantee, which comes from Sunwealth Power itself at the top of the structure there. And then following the exit of the tax equity investor, which would take about 5 years, we would also have a first priority lien on all the assets held by the tax equity partnership. So this is a typical structure, And it also mirrors what we did with Sunwealth when we lent them money in 2018. Just a quick word here. We have taken recent external counsel advice on this exact structure. So this is a latest and greatest advice on how we should be structuring such term financing facilities. That's the end of my short presentation. If there are any questions, otherwise we can go to the resolutions.
Only question is the motion or the resolution is really just granting the ability to do the due diligence. There will be a later vote on the execution of the facility. Is that correct?
No, sorry, I misspoke. It would be to execute the facility. It's just in recognition of the fact that we do have more due diligence to do on the projects themselves. So we haven't commenced due diligence on the projects that we would be financing. And that's because of the state of progress in the development of those projects and how recently this opportunity came to us from Sunwealth. So there's more project level diligence to do, which is a process that we've developed over the last few years. And it's also outlined in the memo how we would go about that diligence.
Got it. I see now. Slide 56 says authorized to execute and deliver versus slide 54 that says grant approval to conduct further due diligence. So they don't exactly match, but I understand. Okay. That's fine. Thank you. Sorry, Madam Chair.
Good question. So we are at, are there any more observations or questions involving resolution 12? Okay, hearing none. All in favor?
Need a motion to approve.
Oh, sorry. It's getting late. May I hear a motion to approve?
I'll approve. Motion to approve.
Thank you, thank you. May I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining?
Is Matt, I'm abstaining.
Okay, Matt's abstaining.
I'm still here.
How are we doing with our quorum? I'm seeing a lot of.
We're good. Yeah, no, we're in good shape. Yeah. And this is the last one, I think. This is the last item that needs a resolution.
Okay.
7E.
Okay,
Louise,
this is me as well. Yeah, still Louise Della Pesca on this one. Next slide, please. Okay, the background to this request is that in 2013, the Green Bank, via its subsidiary, which is called Cephia Solar Services, it set up a tax equity partnership. It's called CT Solar Lease 2. Might have heard it referred to as SL2 more colloquially. And the tax equity investor from the private sector is US Bank in that partnership. It's a very typical partnership flip structure for this tax equity partnership, and that envisions that the US Bank would exit after the ITC recapture period has passed. And we're in 2023 now, which sounds a long time after 2013, but because of the way that projects were developed and sold to this partnership, we're now at the stage that US Bank is expressing an interest in exiting the tax equity partnership. I'll say at this juncture too, I'm not going to talk about any equity valuation. So I'm not going to talk about the stake that US Bank holds and how that's been valued by our independent valuer. That information is included in the memorandum though. So the valuation work that we performed once we learned of US Bank's desire to exit the partnership, we commissioned an independent fair market valuation from an entity called CohnReznick, which is a well-respected entity providing such services. They used a discounted cash flow model to value the equity stake currently held by US Bank in SL2. They actually provided us with a range of valuations depending on some assumptions And we're in the final stages of negotiating with US Bank which assumptions we should use and where we should land in that range. So our request to the board this morning is to grant approval for staff to transact with US Bank to effect its exit from SL2. And our request is at a not to exceed fair market valuation of its equity stake. The number for that valuation can be found in the memorandum to the board. And if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I think the next slide is the resolutions.
Any questions?
I do want to, but
I know, I can tell.
I just want to know why they're exiting, I guess is the fundamental question. Why now do they want to exit? Is there a simple answer or is it more complicated?
Simple.
No, it's not that. It's not much more complicated than everyone does. They don't tend, the tax equity investors, they see these investments over a particular time horizon, and they're not necessarily motivated after the flip date. Because of what happens at the flip, their equity stake reduces significantly, and the cash that they're taking from the project companies reduces significantly too. They've effectively earned all of the return that they were targeting to earn in that first period, which is typically 5 years. And they're not motivated to be a long-term owner. These projects are going to be around for 20 years. And so they have a very kind of standard process of exiting at this exact point.
Got it.
And I would add from a quickly from a risk-weighted assets position as a financial institution, they have to hold capital if the extent to which they have risk-weighted assets in these transactions. So they're really it actually starts ending up being a burden than a benefit from a capital perspective. And so, hence a lot of these financial institutions in particular want to get out once they've gotten, as Louise explained, all their benefits.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Okay, this is our last resolution. Does anybody have any more observations or questions? Okay, hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve resolution 13?
I motion to approve.
Is there a second?
This is
Second, Matt.
Oh, all
right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank
Aye.
you. Thank you. Opposed? Abstaining? Excellent.
All right.
All right.
Great. Moving along. So I wanted to do a real quick introduction to our new Director of Environmental Infrastructure, Lee Welton. I know Lee is on the line here, but Lee was with us a few weeks ago visiting with various members of the board. She still has others that she's going to be meeting with, but it was awesome to see her in and around the staff here today. Do you want to say something?
We just, no pressure, Lee, but we really have high hopes, and we really, really like you. So welcome aboard.
Thank you. We'll move this along in the interest of Circa's presentation, but I am making the rounds and very much look forward to tapping into board expertise and insight as we tackle an incredibly exciting challenge with the broad level of our Environmental Infrastructure Authority. So thanks all.
Excellent. Welcome aboard, Lee. All right, so we're going to go through a little bit of a transition here. We've got John Trzynski and Jim O'Donnell from Circa, the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation. You might recall, Joanna, when was it? Was it our July board meeting? I think it was July. You had suggested that we invite Circa in to give a presentation and overview of their vulnerability index. So just to orient us to the comprehensive plan, our mission is to confront climate change. And when we think about confronting climate change, I think the old way of thinking about it was just focusing on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You know, we are now facing the impacts of climate change, so we need to also be thinking about how to increase our resilience against the impacts of climate change. Resilience has various statutory meanings. I think it was Public Act 20-05, more colloquially known as the Take Back Our Grid Act, that happened after Tropical Storm Isaias knocked out hundreds of thousands of homes for weeks. The definition for resilience was embedded in that policy to prepare for and adapt to, withstand and recover from. You know, there are various ways that this definition comes, but from threats associated with the impacts of climate change. So we've included that definition in our comprehensive plan to give us a guide in terms of thinking about resilience. But we also, in that same act, was the definition of vulnerable communities. So wanting to make sure that those populations that are disproportionately impacted by the effects of climate change actually receive more and more investment in benefits from the technologies that we're helping to enable. So I just wanted to set some of that context, but Joanna, did you want to set some context and introduce our colleagues?
Thanks, Brian, and thank you very much for we're making the time to have Circa present today. I think John might highlight a little bit of where the funding came from, but this basically started as a 2-county project. They acquired more funding to expand some data assessment to the rest of the state and some planning to probably the next third or 2/3, depending how you slice the measurement of the state. So we're really excited about the things that are coming out of here. The resilience for what, for whom, and how are some of the most challenging questions of our time. And now that with the Green Bank's expanded responsibility and Lee's joining the Green Bank, we're just at a tremendous opportunity and an inflection point here. And so I think John and Jim are going to hit on what are some of the ways we can go about tackling this larger problem that we have. So thank you.
Excellent. So why don't we turn it to John and Jim? Thank you both for preparing and for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm just going to leave it to John to take the lead on this, since he knows more about it than me now.
All right. Thanks, Jim, and good morning, everybody. I'll try to condense this into about 7 or 8 minutes, give you the quick executive summary on this work, and we'd be happy to come back and talk about any of it in more detail. So this is a presentation about Resilient Connecticut and some of the geospatial planning tools and ways that we're helping to support the development of the state's resilience project pipeline. And so, yeah, Resilient Connecticut, it started out through a HUD grant through the National Disaster Resilience Competition back in 2018. It since has expanded to the southeast part of the state and the capital region. And it's really about assisting with the development of a resilience project pipeline for the state. And some of the tools and frameworks that we've been using to develop projects in partnership with municipalities we'll cover briefly today. We've also started to focus more on environmental justice specifically, and we've developed what's called an environmental justice screening tool, which we've done in partnership with Connecticut Deep, and that work really grew out of the GC3. Next slide. So this is a little bit of the way in which we're conceiving of our project pipeline, and we really think of it as a continuum. On one end is the just identifying the issues and developing the projects, identifying the needs with municipalities, getting those projects and those needs into plans and different planning documents, and then developing project concepts. And that involves a lot of stakeholder engagement. In some cases, you move down the pipeline, and then through the process of stakeholder engagement, you have to take a step back and revise things. We also do a benefit cost analysis to try to make sure that We are, targeting the strategies to projects that can access federal funding, and the BCA is a big part of that. These are all the different steps that we see that towns need to move through to develop their resilience projects. And we've got up on the top here some examples of projects that Circa has assisted on in different facets over the last 4 to 5 years through this program. Next slide. A quick summary of the vulnerability assessment tools that we've developed through this program to help us identify projects. There are really 3 that I'll cover very briefly. One is this concept called zones of shared risk. The second is what we call the Climate Change Vulnerability Index, or CCVI for short. And then we'll talk a little bit about the environmental justice screen. Next slide. So zones of shared risk, this really was included in the original concept for Resilient Connecticut in the proposal back in 2018. And it's really a spatial planning tool where we're identifying the land uses, the buildings, the people that have a common risk, a specific common risk. And primarily we deal with flood risk when we're talking about zones of shared risk. But it's really a planning tool that we use to help to facilitate negotiation of strategies and projects. And so when we talk about projects, we really think at the scale of these zones, and they're really the building blocks that we use to build up the projects. And you can see this is an early prototype of the mapping that we did in Norwalk. And there are different smaller zones of shared risk that are nested into larger zones of shared risk. And it's a way for us to, approach the community, approach the town and the different stakeholders, and facilitate a planning process to develop a common strategy between all of those different interests and stakeholders. And we now have hundreds of these that we've mapped over the entire state that are, part of our, like I said, our building blocks. Okay, so the Climate Change Vulnerability Index, we could spend an hour talking about this. So I'm gonna very briefly, I think we had a fact sheet that went out with the materials for this meeting. So basically it's an index. So there's a grid of 10-acre grid cells that we've applied across the whole state. And we are taking a bunch of different geospatial data layers, and we're creating an index score to each grid cell. And it's a way for us to basically visualize the pattern of vulnerability across municipalities, across jurisdictions, across a region down to neighborhood scale. And it's something that helps us to facilitate the conversation with municipalities and sort of see the bigger picture. It uses this framework of these 3 categories, which is exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. And that framework really comes from the IPCC as a way of categorizing and characterizing vulnerability. So that's a little brief summary of the CCVI. Why don't we go to the next slide? Yeah, and how does it work? This is in the material that we included. Basically, we look at social demographic factors. We look at things related to the built environment. We look at ecological factors, and we actually have a new category that we've updated since this graphic here that looks at community assets. And then we are categorizing them based on these 3 components of exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. Next slide. So this, for example, so one thing to note is that we have a version of this that is specific to flooding, and then we have one that's specific to extreme heat vulnerability. And so this is the flood CCVI. These are all the different spatial data layers that we've pulled into this, that we're trying to synthesize into these these index scores. And I won't go into detail about each one, just to say that there's a lot of data that we used and we're trying to bring together for the specific tool. Next slide. Okay, this was also something that we included in the material for the meeting. This is something called persists. And this is something that we use to help us do two things, really. When we are looking at a whole portfolio of projects, it's something that we use to measure the different projects against these different factors and criteria. And then we also use it when we're evaluating alternatives for a specific project, in making sure that we're meeting a bunch of different goals for a project. And so persists is basically this little mnemonic tool that we developed, and it's a way of trying to capture a bunch of different factors when we're doing that evaluation. So we've got permittable, equitable, realistic, safe, innovative, scientific, transferable, and sustainable. And we really have looked across these different categories to make sure that when we're selecting projects that we can have the most impact across a number of different considerations. Next slide. And this, we can just click through the rest of these. If you click through a couple of the slides, it'll show this was a scoring rubric that we developed to assist in us doing the prioritization. Okay, next slide. And the environmental justice screening tool, this is something that my colleague Yaprak Onat led over the last 2 years, and this is specific to bringing together some of the social and demographic data with indicators of pollution that may lead to vulnerability for EJ communities. And this was something that grew out of the Governor's Council on Climate Change. It was one of the recommendations of the GC3 report in 2021. And we now have a version of the map that we can use. And if you click to the next slide, this is again, there's a whole bunch of data that went into this, and a similar process to the CCBI, but a different goal for the map. And if you click to the next slide, so this is the EJ screen map, and what we've done here is we've layered all the different projects that we've been working on through Resilient Connecticut over the EJ map, just to see and measure that we're being effective at meeting our goals of addressing the needs of vulnerable communities in Connecticut. And so this is one application where we're evaluating the effectiveness of our work and our planning process. And I think because it is now 11, I'm going to stop there and see if there's questions, and if there's a few extra minutes, I can walk through the rest of the slides. Otherwise, we can hold it there.
You've got a few extra minutes if you'd like.
Okay. So maybe very quickly, I'll go through an example of one of the projects that has come out of Resilient Connecticut. If you click through to the next slide, go ahead to the next slide. So we'll talk about a project in Danbury that we're working on. Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so this is the map of the CCBI in downtown Danbury, and we noticed that there is a patch of flood vulnerability in downtown, and that's due to the proximity to the Still River, as well as a stormwater flooding issue that has been chronically affecting this area for decades, actually. And it's an old buried stream that is known locally as the East Ditch. And it's basically where development was done. They buried the stream in culverts, and the capacity of the drainage system in the culverts is no longer sufficient. If you go to the next slide, this is the heat CCBI for downtown Danbury, and it's a bigger patch of vulnerability. And that's mostly because the CCBI is picking up on the presence of impervious surfaces, an older building stock, and also a vulnerable population in that area. And so if you go to the next slide, When we see places that have both this flood risk and this heat risk, we call these resilience opportunity areas. And we really look for that overlap between those issues when we approach the town to try to develop a project. If you go to the next slide. So we, back in, I believe it was 2021, started talking to the town about what we were seeing in the CCBI and the zones of shared risk mapping. And they confirmed that, they've had this chronic flood risk in downtown Danbury due to the stormwater flooding issue. And so we felt like this was a good candidate for us to develop a project through Resilient Connecticut. If you go to the next slide. If you go back one, so we developed a flood model and we looked at sort of the existing flood conditions due to the insufficient drainage capacity. And then that image on the right there is the future conditions for flooding. And then we also looked at the buildings and which of the buildings and which sections of the neighborhood were contributing to the excess heat in the heat island in downtown Danbury. If you go to the next slide. And so this is a primary piece of the project is going to be increasing the capacity of the drainage system along Main Street and along the East Ditch. And so we have our partners at Fuss and O'Neill that are working on the design for that currently. And if we go to the next slide, we're also thinking about ways to include green infrastructure, street trees, sort of improve the pedestrian experience for people as they're walking and biking and traveling along this area of the neighborhood. So the project ultimately is going to be a combination of those drainage improvements and the streetscape improvements that we're visualizing here. If you go to the next slide, there's a little concept drawing that we had done as part of this. And if you click to the next, that's the existing condition. And then the next slide is the proposed improvements to the streetscape that would include some green infrastructure, improved drainage, and streetscape improvements. So if you go to the next slide, I believe that's it. And I'll pause there if there's any questions.
Yeah, this is John Harity. I have a question. It seems as though that all of this is voluntary on the part of the communities, and I wonder if there is room for making some of it mandatory.
So in terms of the making the planning process mandatory?
I guess in terms of addressing conditions, like for instance, if you have chronic flooding, then that means that every time it floods, the insurance companies get hit up. The municipality has to pay. I'm imagining that there's going to be state funds and maybe federal funds involved. And we don't have the kind of flooding that they have around the Mississippi, but the discussion becomes the same of how long do you allow people to let chronic conditions go before you say that you have to do something different. And so in some cases, legislation says that if you have a certain environmental conditions that chronically create a momentary disaster in your community, then you have to address it. You can't decide just to let the downtown flood every year in perpetuity. So I'm wondering, we were talking about considering the legislative session. Is there anything that we'd want to say that you just have to fix this. You have to address this.
Yeah, that's a big topic. I think Danbury is required to have a natural hazard mitigation plan in order to qualify for FEMA funds after a disaster, after a flood. So they have some plans that are required where they have to take stock of their natural hazards. This area in Danbury was included in their hazard mitigation plans for the last 10 years or so. But what we saw was that nothing was sort of being done to move it along. So I think, so there are some existing processes that require the municipalities to at least assess what their issues are and propose actions. I think helping the municipalities get from we know there's a problem to we have a solution that is fundable and it's cost effective, that's sort of the biggest gap that we see and where we're trying to assist. And I know that other folks on the call might have some thoughts about the legislative session and the policy piece of this.
I would just add that one thing is, unfunded mandates can be challenging because you need money. But from a money perspective, DECD has the Community Investment Fund. We've actually had 2 different projects win an award from the CAF board to address infrastructure, chronic flooding infrastructure. One was in Stratford, and the other I think was, oh geez, I should know this. There's 2. But the point is I would encourage Circa and the work that you're doing here, and when you talk to communities, to encourage them to apply to the Community Investment Fund with their legislative support for funding.
Great suggestion.
Great.
Yeah,
Well,
and that
when
is
you think about it, we have old infrastructure, so we have environmental issues in terms of rising seas and all of that, and then we have really old pipes because we're the oldest part of the country. So there are these 2 things, and they sometimes compete instead of working together for the funding that exists. Right, and then I'm just seeing when I've seen the trees, which look very nice, by the way. Now we're going to plant more trees to create, better environments for neighborhoods and stuff. And that feels like, it just feels like a coming together of a lot of efforts, and funding opportunities would be a good way to approach.
A couple of comments. One is the statute that expanded our scope, Public Act 21115. The first 18 pages of that statute was a voluntary statute that allowed towns to create their own stormwater authorities. So I'm channeling Dr. Rebecca French here a little bit. So towns could create their own way to fund the modernization of the infrastructure to address some of those issues. I talked to a friend who was from Washington State, and she talked about her stormwater utility. I'm like, you have a utility? She's like, oh yeah, I pay. And it was just like common to them. So it's not, I think we have 2 in Connecticut. We have New Britain and Groton, I think, that have stormwater authorities.
New London.
So the notion of getting locations to think, or New London, so there you go. So the notion of getting people to think about this as a tool is one thing. The other thing is I love the heat stress and the flooding. It just draws me back to thinking about things like the Meriden Green and how you can use green space as a way. We saw the pictures of that John was showing there of the streets with trees. Well, it's trees, yet they're providing shading so you can get some of the heat stress alleviation, some of the carbon sequestration a little bit, but it's the bioswell ability of that nature where it's almost storing the stormwater runoff temporarily so it doesn't inundate the entire system. So when we look at fields like behind this building here and thinking about how nature could take when we get these rain bombs in Hartford and just start absorbing a lot of that water for a little bit of time so that it just doesn't overwhelm the MDC, down the hill so nature is, I think, going to be a big part of that kind of
Well, no, for sure. The sewage treatment plants are overflowing now. Plus, we've never figured out how to get all the drugs out of people's leave behinds. So that's all going into Long Island Sound, and we're having huge bacterial shutdowns of beaches because suddenly they get overwhelmed. So that's another area that kind of needs to be put into this little colony of pursuits. And I think when we created Circa a few years ago, and I feel so bad for them, we just thought that, well, we're going to go from town to town and just make it happen. People will listen and support.
On the stormwater side too, we should dovetail our efforts with the state's MS4 program, because that requires a goal for communities to disconnect impervious surfaces. There's, I think, a 5% goal. I can't remember if it's year over year. But when we start going down this path with Lee, we should make sure to coordinate our efforts with that, as well as the community rating system for the national flood insurance, which a lot of towns are aware of. And Brian, just one more on the heat island. A lot of towns, certainly New Haven, has incorporated into its zoning a SRI index for new construction, the solar reflectivity index, to reduce heat island effect. I mean, there are a lot of tools, but people aren't aware of them. Most, rank and file regulators, I think, are not aware of how to pull them all together. So I think that's an area the Green Bank might be a clearinghouse of information, like we've done in the past on solar.
You can see, John, Jim, thank you for teeing that up. You can see how you're getting the juices flowing. And Lee, I'm sure you're on there thinking, whoa, all right, like there's lots of, yeah. There's just a lot of interesting opportunities here. And yeah, thank you for teeing that up.
No problem. Thanks, Brian.
Okay, and then I think we have one final item here on other business. I'm going to give John Harity, if you're there, I'll give you some space in a second to make a clarification. We were notified in September by the Department of Energy that the Green Bank is considered a state energy financing institution. We had that in our comp plan to work on this year. What that means is the DOE Loan Program Office, Senator Murkowski from Alaska for years has been working to try to get legislation passed that would allow for the Loan Program Office to be able to provide their loan guarantee and their programs to commercially available technology already, as long as it was linked to a state. So right now, the Loan Program Office can only use resources for technologies that are not yet available in the commercial marketplace. So you can kind of think of them between PI and full scale, like they're innovators, they're trying to scale up, but they haven't reached commercial scale, so that's where they can play. But now with CEFI, we could have projects that we submit ourselves. We could partner with a number of other groups, which Bert is currently leading on. But this is an important designation where we're trying to figure out the power of the tool. The second bullet there is we included an end report on IPC's health and safety grant. You might recall the $1.5 million revolving loan fund for health and safety. That's a final grant report out. And then John, if you wanted to provide a clarification on Posigen, here's
yes.
a moment for you.
Yeah, it was I had raised at the last board meeting, we had some business about Posigen, and I had raised an issue that had been conveyed to me by somebody I considered a kind of an impeccable source, that Posigen had bad practices concerning workers wanting to organize, that they were anti-union company and had applied bad practices in that regard. So, and Bert and Brian urged me to get them some factual information on it, because they were going to be meeting with Posigen. I asked our policy director from the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs to do a deep dive on it, and our policy director is Allison Pritcher, and she's an attorney and an excellent researcher, and she did a great report. And it turns out that I was completely mistaken, or the person who told me about Posigen's employee practices was completely mistaken. That in fact, there's nothing on record that indicates that they have a bad relationship with their employees, or that they've done anything to untoward to discourage organizing, or to otherwise be a bad employer. So You know, and there's a lot of different places you can look for that. You can find signs of it from the labor board, from CHRO, a lot of different places. And frankly, there was nothing. So I wanted to make sure I got back to the board. I wrote a letter to Brian and Bert immediately after receiving the report, but I wanted to let the board know that my concerns were misplaced, and I apologize for besmirching Posigen for a moment there, but I felt really encouraged, and I did all this in the absence of knowing that Ben Healy is now the CEO of Posigen, and I can't think of a business person that I would trust more than Ben Healy, frankly. So, so just so the board knows, anybody that's left on the call, that Posigen is in fact appears to be a really good employer. So that's it.
Thank you, John. Thank you for that clarification. I'm sure Ben's cheeks are red right now. In fact, this summer, when President Biden unveiled his Bidenomics, Treasurer Yellen decided to go announce it at Posigen. So yeah, Ben is right there. So thank you for that clarification. So I think we've gotten to the end of our agenda here. We could make a motion to adjourn, and I'm noticing all our staff are popping on here for the ethics training, but if you want to make the motion to approve, we could adjourn this and then go to the ethics training.
Okay. So do I hear a motion to adjourn this board meeting?
Motion.
Okay.
So
All in favor?
moved.
Opposed? Everybody hang around all day? Okay,
All
we're
right.
adjourned.
All right, staff, hang out on here. We're gonna turn it back.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. This is Joe with the Connecticut Green Bank team, and thank you all for joining our annual Code of Ethics training. We are joined today by two of our colleagues from the Office of State Ethics, Peter Lewandowski, Executive Director, and Sarah Clark, Director of Education and Communications. This is our annual training that's required for all staff and board members of the Board of Directors. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Sarah and Peter.
All right. Again, thank you for having us. We are happy to be here. This is just a basic overview of the Code of Ethics for Public Officials and State Employees. There is a lot of information that we'll unload on you here this morning. Some of it will be obviously, you will recognize right away from prior presentations, and it will sound familiar. A couple new things, and we'll focus on certain important aspects of your work. So because we have a lot of information, maybe if there are any questions, if we could hold them till the very end, and we'll stick around to answer those questions at the very end. I'll pass the baton to Sarah, who will start the presentation.
Thank you. As Peter noted, we are from the Office of State Ethics, and our office, just for background for you, we've been around for about 50 years now, and we started as the State Ethics Commission, and it was recalibrated, so to speak, in 2005. So here we are as the Office of State Ethics, and we have a 9-member board that's appointed by the governor and legislative leaders, and a small but mighty 15-person staff led by Peter Lewandowski here in Hartford. Today we're going to go over different aspects of the Code of Ethics, and the first thing is who does the Code of Ethics cover? And so the Connecticut Code of Ethics covers state officials, employees, lobbyists, and contractors. There's a separate code for lobbyists, but we're not going to specifically go into that today. For the rules of engagement, we're going to have 7 subsets of this conversation today, and we are going to go over the use of state position, gifts, conflicts of interest, outside employment or moonlighting, interacting with lobbyists, contracting with the state, and the revolving door provisions. If you take nothing else from this presentation today, we want to make sure that you know that our phone lines and emails and figurative doors are always open to you. Always get advice. We are here to serve as a resource for you as you navigate how to operate within your state position. You can reach us at ose@ct.gov or at 860-263-2400. Most offices have an ethics liaison, and you would know who to go to within your internal channels if you have questions, but you're also able to call our office directly. And the Green Bank, like many other state entities, may have a ethics policy that's more strict than the state code, but today we're going to be giving you the parameters of the state code itself. So our first topic is use of state position. A lot of this is pretty self-explanatory, like lanes on a highway. You want to keep your state position within its lane, so you would not use your state position for your own financial gain, the financial gain of your immediate family, or your associated businesses. With each of our subsets, we have a scenario. So in this case, and we'll be asking these to you in a just sort of, for you to noodle on, and we'll give you the answer following that. So in your private employment, you provide financial investment consultancy to private clients. You're planning to launch a new interactive website and increase your social media presence to promote your services. In promoting your services online, you include the fact that you are connected to the Connecticut Green Bank. And like a lot of these, it's in a gray area of it depends. So we understand that there are resources available to you like LinkedIn or about.me and places where you would assemble an online curriculum vitae or resume. And in those cases, you absolutely can include that you are associated or employed by the Green Bank. However, if you are trying to use that connection to leverage yourself in your business or to gain more clients, then that would be an inappropriate use of your state office.
That's right. And so, for example, if you're crafting on your social media or your website a promotional narrative to attract potential clients, in those narratives directed at clients, it would be inappropriate for you to state the fact that you are employed by the Green Bank in order to enhance your credentials or enhance your marketability to those clients. Whereas, again, stating the fact that you're employed in the Green Bank with the Green Bank on your resume, LinkedIn page would be permissible.
Thank you. Second category is gifts, which are defined as anything of value which is directly or personally received unless consideration of equal or greater value is provided. So gifts, there are such thing as restricted donors, which are registered lobbyists, those regulated by or seeking to do business with the Green Bank, or those who are on the Department of Administrative Services pre-qualified vendor or contractor list. And so from this pool of people, these gifts are prohibited unless they fall under a gift exception. When it comes to non-restricted donors, there is a $100 limit to the gift if it is given to you because of your position with the Green Bank. And then there's no limit if it's not given to you. So your spouses, beware, they're not off the hook for your anniversaries or your religious holidays or any of that. They're still perfectly capable of giving you a gift without any limits. There are 19 common gift exceptions, and the more common ones that are utilized are token items. Those would be like the stress balls and pens and baseball hats and stuff like that. Food or beverage, and there are specific limits for how much these items can be worth. Rebates or discounts, and in this case, if like Verizon has a discount for state employees, all government employees can take advantage of that, so you also may. And then with ceremonial plaques, there's a limit to how much that plaque can be worth. There are certain family members who have no restriction on the gifts, and this would be your spouse, fiance, your parent, grandparent, brother, sister, or their spouses, and then your children and their spouses. And that would be even if those family members are considered restricted donors. So if you've got a lobbyist in the family and they fall into this category, then they don't need to adhere to the restrictions, but if they're outside that, then they do. Coworkers. So it's wonderful that we all get along working together. However, there is, and we want to show each other that appreciation, but there is a $99.99 limit per gift, and you may not pool your resources together to exceed that limit, and that applies to everyone in the chain of command. The exceptions for that dollar limit is when there's a major life event, as you can see down here, and with induction to religious adulthood being like a confirmation or bar bat mitzvah. There are a number of conferences that we as state employees have the opportunity to attend in either an active or passive way. So actively serving on a panel or leading a discussion, or passively sitting in the audience and absorbing all the information. And you are able to receive, the state can cover your expenses for travel, lodging, and meals, but they cannot be lavish. And that's defined as, and this is what usually gets a chuckle from the audience, is if the state wouldn't pay for it, then you're not able to seek reimbursement on that. So the first class travel or presidential suite, we apologize, is off the table since this is not something the state of Connecticut would pay for. Also, you may not accept any fees or honoraria or entertainment compensated for your whatever, complimentary entertainment is what I'm looking for. You can't be paid to speak, and if everyone's going out to a musical after the talk that evening, then you'll just need to pay for your own ticket. There is a form on our website called Necessary Expenses and Gifts to the State. If you need to disclose that there has been this transaction and it is for your lodging and or out-of-state travel, you do not need to fill out this form if the conference is being hosted by another state's state entity. So if you're going to Ohio and Ohio State University is hosting it, then that's fine, because states can compensate for other states' employees.
And that also extends to the federal government and any governmental entity. Disclosure of receipt of necessary expenses or gifts to the state is not required.
So in the event that you do receive a prohibited gift, immediately refuse or return that gift that does not meet any applicable gift exception, or pay the donor fair market value within 30 days.
Yeah, so just one note about prohibited gifts. I mean, obviously there are certain situations as we're approaching the holiday season. There are certain situations where it's not practical to return a gift because either you do not know the identity of the donor, and more importantly, for example, if you receive a fruit basket or something that is just the practicality of returning it is not there. At that point, there are two options. One is to share that gift that can be consumed, let's say a gift basket, share that gift with all colleagues, just place it in a common area, send an email to everyone that this gift arrived, and so everyone can partake in it. And if that's not practical, then we recommend just simply donating it to a charity of your choice, again, assuming you do not derive any tax benefit from that donation. But those are the two ways to use if it's not practical to return the gift to the donor.
So your longtime friend gets hired by a government relations department of a Fortune 500 company. The company is a registered client lobbyist in Connecticut. You're going out to dinner and he wants to pay for it. Can your friend pay for your dinner? And as noted before, it depends. So is your friend specifically also a lobbyist at this company? So that would make the difference. So the company can be a registered client lobbyist, but if your specific friend is not a registered communicator, then he certainly may pay for your dinner. In the event that he is, he can cover up to $50 worth of your dinner, and you will just pay for the difference thereafter. Conflicts of interest. So we're going to go over 3 parts, things being defining that it is a conflict, and then whether it's direct or potential, and then the Office of State Ethics and how we handle appearances of a conflict. So when dealing with conflicts of interest, there are 2 kinds. There's substantial conflict and potential conflict. So in a substantial conflict of interest, you will receive a direct monetary gain or loss by your official activity dealing with this conflict. So either you, your spouse, your dependent child, or your associated business. And this would be in a way that is distinctly different from others in the same profession or group. And when it comes to potential conflicts, it's the reasonable expectation that this would happen. So it's a little bit looser, but in either scenario, you should recuse yourself using a written statement. And if, an email, just how to formulate it evades you, you can certainly use the template that's available on our website.
And just one note, there is a distinction how we treat the recusal process and a statement between state employees and members of a board. So, for example, state employees have to recuse themselves and file this written statement with their immediate supervisor. Members of the board, in this case, the Green Bank, have to, if they can, of course, recuse themselves, and the alternative, they can state on the record in the minutes of the proceeding the conflict and why, despite the conflict, they can still act in public's interest. But again, that conflict has to be stated on the record, and a copy of that statement that's presented to the full board has to be filed with the Office of State Ethics in those instances. Again, so it's either the recusal for board members or on the record statement.
And just as a point of clarification, when we're talking about associated businesses, there is a difference between the associated business for which you could derive financial gain from versus a nonprofit where you are serving on a board as a volunteer. So being able, the conflicts that are between you and then something that's entirely voluntary that you have no financial connection with, that's not considered a conflict.
That's right. And you can and technically take official action for the benefit of that nonprofit if you are your connection simply is voluntary and you do not derive any financial benefit from that nonprofit.
Your spouse is a developer and wants to obtain a loan on favorable terms with the Connecticut Green Bank. Can you utilize your connections to cut through the red tape to get the application through the process expeditiously? And this is a no.
Yes, there is no gray area here.
Yeah. All right. And when it comes to appearances of a conflict, the Office of State Ethics does not have jurisdiction over that. We encourage you to kick things up the food chain within the structure at the Connecticut Green Bank, generally speaking, using the optics test, the smell test, seeing that, you, by your judgment and discretion, if you think it might be a problem, it's certainly worth talking to someone about it. And you certainly can call us too, but we can't give you a definitive up or down on whether or not something's okay. Outside employment. So when this has been a huge rise, especially since the pandemic, that people are able to utilize, and be productive not only on their day job, but on nights and weekends. So the requirements are that your outside employment may not impair your independence of judgment. You may not utilize your confidential information that you've obtained as an employee of the state. And also you cannot use the time, resources, and other things associated with your state position for the benefit of your outside employment. So general rules on outside employment, you may not accept employment from an entity that can benefit from your state position, so over which you have regulatory, contractual, or supervisory authority. You cannot be paid to do privately what you're already required to do as part of your state job. As mentioned earlier, you may not use your time, materials, or your personnel to further, benefit your outside employer, and you may not use your state title in your advertising materials. Also, you cannot use your state position and the resources that you have there to drum up business, the email lists, the contacts you make to then, help your outside employment. You cannot accept outside employment where your state position lends credence to the private practice, which does not arise from your expertise alone. You may not accept outside employment that would interfere with your ability to devote the requisite time and energy to your state position. And so meaning that your day job must always take precedence. So for those people who are looking to, do some driving on the nights and weekends, if that driving now starts to take place during business hours, that's going to become a problem. So in general statutes 1-84D, you may not represent others for compensation before 11 listed state regulatory agencies.
And those we're talking about traditional regulatory agencies such as Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, Consumer Protection, DMV, insurance, banking, siting council, those traditional regulatory agencies. So this provision would prohibit you from representing anyone for compensation before those agencies. So if, let's say, you have an outside employment where you are in the business of representing clients, you would be precluded from representing them before those 11 regulatory agencies. In addition, if you are associated, be careful if you're planning to associate yourself with a law firm, accounting firm, or engineering firm that is in the business of representing clients before those regulatory agencies, as employment with such firms would be prohibited because essentially, they engage in representation of clients, so just beware of especially if you're an attorney or an accountant and you're in the business of representing others, to be aware of this provision.
Does that apply to board members as well?
With respect to board members, yes. So, for example, if you are the only exception under this provision applies to elected officials. Elected officials are exempted from although I take it back, for the board members of the Green Bank, there's an exception for board members, and I will specifically, we'll move forward and I will jump in back. I will get the actual language from the statute to you. But this provision applies clearly to full-time public officials and full-time state employees, to all state employees and also to public officials, except for board members.
Thank you.
So going back to your chain of command, it is impermissible for supervisors to employ their subordinates and also the inverse, your subordinates to employ your supervisor in your outside business. In addition to your state employment, you engage in part-time bookkeeping support where most of your work is focused on individual clients. You are thinking of joining a larger accounting firm so you don't have to deal with the administrative aspects of private practice. The firm represents various business clients who have matters before the Siting Council and DEEP. Can you join the accounting firm? So in this case, we're saying it's representing those in front of your own agency. So that would be one place where you think maybe this would work. However, I'm sorry.
No, and that's true. So for example, in this scenario, if you are an accountant and you're thinking of joining a firm and they're in the business of representing folks before regulatory agencies, unfortunately, under this scenario, if you're a full-time state employee or a public official, then you would have to you would have to do your own paperwork, your own books, and not join the firm. Again, exception for board members.
Our fifth subsection is on interacting with lobbyists, and we're going to go over the definitions and the exemptions. So lobbying means communicating directly or soliciting others to communicate with any official or his staff in the legislative or executive branches of government or in a quasi-public agency for the purpose of influencing any legislative or administrative action. This is important because a lot of times people forget that there is such a thing as administrative lobbying, which we'll get more into. So there's legislative lobbying. So that's the stuff you see on CTN, or not see literally, but that, this is dealing with the legislature and they're making bills and you're influencing legislative changes. For administrative lobbying, this is, meeting with agency heads and trying to somehow influence, budgetary decisions or, changes in policy for themselves as well. So this also comes down to when they're awarding contracts, grants, or purchasing agreements as well. And there is a exception when it comes to salespeople. It does not include the communications by a representative of a vendor or an employee of the registered client lobbyist, which representative or employee acts as a salesperson and does not otherwise engage in lobbying regarding any administrative action.
Yeah, and it's really the distinction here is that this has to be a truly bona fide salesperson, person whose primary duties is to promote products and services. Clearly, if you have a company and suddenly a CEO knocks on your door and tries to pitch a service or a product from their company to the green bank, to the agency, they're engaging in lobbying. That exemption would not apply. Whereas someone whose day-to-day job description is to do sales, then the salesperson exception will apply, and they do not have to worry about lobbyist registration.
And this slide explains that there are the two other exceptions to administrative lobbying would be court-ordered communications as well as statutorily required or other, official communications. Additionally, an exception to administrative lobbying would be preparing or submitting filings pursuant to state statute, regulation, or agency rule. Communications that are made incident to the performance of a contract or implement of a permit, and then also contacts for informational purposes.
And the whole purpose of these few slides about lobbying is to make you aware that there is considerable administrative lobbying going on before executive branch agencies and quasi-publics by private parties. And there are some exceptions to the rule, but if someone is communicating with you, they absolutely can. The communication is not the issue, but they have to identify themselves as a lobbyist if they are indeed representing someone in that capacity. We're just making this, known to you, as traditionally folks think of lobbying as simply lobbying the legislature, but there's a considerable lobbying going on involving executive branch agencies as well as quasi-publics.
So in this scenario, the CT Green Bank issued a request for proposal for a new solar project. A company applies, and shortly after that, the applicant contacts the executive director of the Connecticut Green Bank to discuss the strength of their submission. Would this be considered administrative lobbying?
And the answer is yes, because it does not meet the exemption for the request for proposal process. Traditionally, when folks respond to RFPs and go through the established procedures that agency has, all of that type of activity in the context of RFP is exempted. If, however, you have the person contacting directly the executive director of the Green Bank because they may happen to know the executive director and they just simply want to cut through the procedural tape, then that's lobbying. Again, it's not prohibited. We're just saying that that's considered lobbying, and if that person expends certain funds in those efforts, they may have to register as a lobbyist.
Our next section is on state contracting, and we're going to go over the prohibitions and process when it comes to contracting with the state.
So this is an important provision. It's section 1-101 and N in general statutes. It's requires private entities that seek state contracts with executive branch agencies, with quasi-publics, to be responsible bidders. They are prohibited from soliciting information from a public official or state employee that is not available to other bidders for that contract with the intent to obtain competitive advantage, getting kind of insider information to enhance their standing in their RFP process, for example. They cannot intentionally or recklessly charge state agency for work not performed or goods or services not provided. That's common sense, obviously. Falsifying invoices or bills, and intentionally violating or circumventing state competitive bidding and ethics laws. So what happens in that scenario, if we could just go back, if someone does or engages in that type of activity, we obviously will enforce it. Such matters would be referred to us, the Office of State Ethics. We also work with the Office of the Attorney General if someone overcharged the state to recoup those funds. And if there's criminal activity, clearly matters would be referred to the state's attorney's office for criminal prosecution if someone engages in that type of fraud. But again, if you ultimately what happens is that someone gets the scarlet letter of being not irresponsible bidder, and that may have adverse effect on them and impact on their future bidding and engagement of or pursuit of state contracts. The next, this is just in terms of state contracting involving state employees and public officials. Obviously, state employees and public officials may engage in state contracting. Traditionally, the rule is you may not enter into state contract unless it's open. It goes through an open and public process. This particular rule does not apply to employees of quasi-publics. However, members of the Green Bank and other quasi-public boards are also exempted unless they exercise authority or control over the subject matter of that contract. So if you're voting on the contract, or let's say, I'm sorry, not voting, but let's say your board reviews a contract of an entity with which you may be associated. You may be abstaining from it. But again, if a company with which you are associated, or let's say you are a shareholder of a company that pursues a contract with the Green Bank, that if you exercise some form of authority, or you're part of a board that exercises you're a member of the board that exercises authority of the contract over the contract, then that contract would have to undergo open and public process. So this is a scenario involving contracting. The Green Bank is holding their holiday party and would like to hire a DJ to handle the music during the event. A staff person's son is working night and weekends as a DJ while he attends college. Can the Green Bank hire the staff person's son to work the holiday party? Well, the answer is yes. You do not have to undergo through an open and public process because, again, employees of quasi-publics are exempted from that rule in that scenario.
Don't tell DAS you can pay the son more than $100. They were told that they were capped, but you're all set.
Yep.
All right.
So the last topic we want to cover is revolving door. There are certain basic rules involving post-state employment, and there are 2 lifetime bans, 2 one-year restrictions, and we'll focus first on the lifetime restrictions. Common sense provision: you may not ever disclose confidential information you learned in your state position for your own financial gain or that of another person. Confidential information is defined in General Statutes 1-79. The other important lifetime ban is the site switching prohibition. This one is very narrow in its application, and it means that you may never represent anyone other than the state concerning any particular matter. What do we mean by particular matter? Contracts, grants, specific projects in which you participated substantially while in state service and in which there is substantial state interest. So, for example, you leave state service, you were involved, you voted as a board member on a specific contract, you leave state service, you leave board membership, you end up working for an entity that happens to be is in charge of executing that contract in which you were substantially involved. If there's any issue involving the execution of that contract, you may not represent that private entity before the Green Bank. So someone else has to represent that entity and not you. And the reason why is because you were substantially involved in its award or execution or negotiation, whatever that is, in whatever the material scope that you were involved in. Same rule, of course, applies to employees of the Green Bank. If you were involved in proposing, negotiating a contract, same rule, the site switching prohibition would apply. Again, this is not a prohibition on employment. It's just simply you may not represent the private party on the matter in which you were involved in while working for the state. 1 year restriction, cooling off provision. For 1 year, this is very common. For 1 year, after you leave state service, you may not represent anyone for compensation. That's the key. For compensation before your former agency concerning any matter in which the state has substantial interest. So technically, pro bono representation is okay, assuming it's truly pro bono. It's not a delayed compensation. And this provision does not apply to representation of others before other quasi-publics or executive branch agencies. It simply applies to the Green Bank. So for 1 year, you may not represent anyone for compensation before the Green Bank. And finally, the last revolving door provision, it's a 1 year restriction. And this one probably is extensively applicable to employees and officials and members of the Green Bank. You may not be hired for 1 year from the date you leave state service by a party to a state contract valued at $50,000 or more. I'm assuming that you are involved in a substantial number of contracts that are valued at $50,000 or more. So you may not be, again, particularly if you were substantially involved by negotiating or awarding that contract, and if the contract was signed within the last year of state service. So you would be precluded from pursuing employment with the party to such contract for 1 year, and they are precluded from hiring you for 1 year from the date you leave state service if that contract was signed in the final year of your state service. A scenario involving revolving door provisions. Upon leaving state service, you join a lobbying firm that engages in both legislative and executive branch lobbying. Can you represent clients before the legislative committees immediately upon leaving state service? Absolutely. That cooling off provision applies only to the Green Bank. One caveat, however, is here if the legislature creates a task force, let's say on renewable energies, and the task force is comprised of various stakeholders, including the Green Bank. Appearance before such task force may be precluded if, for example, the Green Bank has some say on the subject matter. The Green Bank is represented and plays a role on the task force. Appearance before the task force would be considered an appearance before the Green Bank. So, but this rarely happens. It has to be a specific task force that includes members of the Green Bank as participants. And generally speaking, again, the cooling off provisions strictly would apply only to appearances before the Green Bank and not simply any other legislative committee that does not involve Green Bank business. I'm sorry, that does not involve representatives of the Green Bank in the proceedings. But for example, if you have, let's assume for a second, Environment Committee, the Legislative Committee meets, and other members, let's say the Green Bank testifies before the committee, you may also testify and be in the same room as Green Bank representatives, because again, you are presenting to the legislature and not necessarily to the Green Bank. And finally, the last few words, we're almost done. The last few words about enforcement, our enforcement proceedings. The enforcement of the codes of ethics is initiated by a complaint. Any member of the public, anyone can file a complaint with our office. The important thing to stress here that all of our complaints are confidential, and they remain confidential until a judge of the Superior Court determines there's probable cause to proceed to an open and public hearing. Confidentiality is very important in terms of ethics enforcement, because you can appreciate that ethics allegations of ethics violations can have adverse impact on someone's professional and personal reputation. Therefore, that confidentiality is sacrosanct. It's preserved by our office. We take it seriously, and the matter only becomes public when a third party, independent party, a judge of the Superior Court determines there is sufficient evidence to proceed to an open hearing. And of course, when there is an open hearing, ultimately the matter goes before our board, the Citizens Ethics Advisory Board, and they have the ultimate authority to impose penalties, including civil penalties of up to $10,000 per violation. If you have any questions, as we said at the outset, please call us. If you wish to maintain anonymity, you may do so. You can also, speak to your ethics liaison. You can have anonymous conversation with our legal division to determine if, let's say, conduct is questionable under the ethics code. And you may also provide an anonymous tip to our ethics enforcement division. One thing about those conversations, any telephonic conversations to our office, to our legal division, that is, can stay anonymous. However, if you send an email that is not considered a complaint, and it's simply an email requesting advice, written requests for advice are subject to freedom of information laws. And finally, keep in mind that every agency, including quasi-publics, have so-called mandatory reporters. Agency heads, their deputies, persons in charge of state agency procurement, contracting, and human resources are mandatory reporters for purposes of ethics violations if they have a reasonable cause to believe that someone has violated the ethics code. And that's it. We'll be happy to stick around. Thank you for having us. This is kind of a quick overview of the Code of Ethics. We'll stick around to answer any questions you may have.
I think maybe hearing none, we can probably close for the afternoon. Peter and Sarah, thank you so much for our training, and we appreciate it. And we'll definitely reach out with any questions as they come up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Take care. Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.